Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that, plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast featuring Kate Riga. So we are back with another episode of the podcast. Let me just say at the front, I'm getting over a bad cold, so if I sound a little different, that's why that is, just in case you're wondering. I don't know if I do or not. But we're going to talk, we're going to talk about a lot of things today, but we're going to start talking about the pardon. Joe Biden pardoned his son. He was, as we know, there was a gun charge and a tax evasion charge. He was about to be sentenced on both of those. And the president didn't just pardon him for those offenses. He basically carved out a decade-long period in which anything he did within that period, he cannot be prosecuted for. And at various points, the president said he would not do this, and he did do this. So that's an additional part of the equation here. And there is a lot of reaction. You may have seen it. I did a post right after this happened in which I said, yeah, I'm 100% fine with it. And I'm glad he did it. I had actually hadn't really given it a lot of thought, to be honest with you. But it popped into my head a few times since the election, like, is he going to do this, or, might he do this or something like that? So that was kind of my um, verdict, and so to speak. And, sometimes you reason something out and then you make a decision based on the different things you've put together in your head. And other times something is very intuitive and visceral to you. And then it's more of a matter of thinking about not so much, justifying your kind of visceral take on a question as thinking through, like, okay, why do I feel so strongly about this? And for me, this was in the latter category. And what it came down to for me was sort of three things. Uh, One was simply that I don't think Hunter Biden would be in any of this if it weren't for the political war on his father. I'm totally confident of that. And at least in some of these cases, these are charges that never would have been brought in, even aside from that. Um, so that's the first thing. Why I think it's you know good, fine that he did it. Um, at a certain level, I just feel like I think Joe Biden's done a lot of good things and been through a lot. Obviously, made a lot of mistakes, like we all do. Um, and I feel like he felt he needed to do this, and I'm glad he did, because I really don't want, I'd rather not see him spending the last few years of his life seeing Donald Trump torture his son, you know, kind of my feeling. But the biggest thing is kind of the overarching thing for me is that I I have this sense that, so much of what Democrats do these days is getting caught up in procedural details and a sort of a fastidiousness about things. And, one of my big takeaways about my big takeaways about, in some ways, about the last 4 years is that Democrats spent a lot of time on process and fastidiousness when the real things that were happening were kind of, when the real world was going by and they were missing it. And I'm sort of sick of Democrats always being the ones who apologize. So for all of those things, I felt, you know, could see it both ways, but I'm glad he did it. Understand why he did it. And I'm actually affirmatively glad he did it. And I've become even more, uh, as time has gone by, I have felt that even more strongly. And I get your emails, and we get tons of emails, and I read is, uh, not every single one, but I read most of them, and I was surprised to see that the great majority of you, I mean, verging on all of you, seem to agree that that this was the right thing for him to do. Um, so there's one additional matter though that I wanted to address. That's less visceral and all that kind of stuff, but is a kind of a more technical matter. And I have seen some people say that you know it's one thing to pardon him, but giving him this kind of blank check for 10 years, that was too much. That's an abuse or something like that. This is the one thing that I am absolutely certain that that was the right thing to do. And if you disagree, you're wrong. I think you're objectively wrong. And here's what I mean by that. Again, if you just think he shouldn't have done this because you think it's wrong, or because you think he said he wouldn't do it, okay, totally, I respect that. I understand why you feel that way, blah 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 blah. But if he was going to issue this pardon, I think it goes without saying that he had to do this extra step, because if he hadn't, the Trump Justice Department would have come right back and come up with 20 more charges to charge him with as payback. That is absolutely certain. Absolutely certain. They might have done it without without him even having issued a pardon in the first place. But if he did, he had to make it a blanket pardon to make sure that he wasn't leaving his son at the mercy of the Trump Justice Department. This to me is absolutely clear and just a dead certainty. The guy who may well be the next head of the FBI has said repeatedly in interviews that he wants to go after Hunter Biden as soon as Trump is back in power, talking about this Kash Patel guy. So again, a little additional point about the blanket nature of it. To me, that is an open and shut case if he was going to do the pardon, and that is my take on the whole thing. So, Kate, are you going to disagree with me? What do you think? I noticed
I
some
don't know that it
consternation in your eyes as I
oh,
as
well,
I was as I was watching.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I just have a lot of, I don't know, a nuanced take, if you will, which
Okay,
is
all
this.
right, we need a
Okay.
nuanced take.
So from the personal emotional side, obviously I get it. I think everyone gets it from that vantage point. And if it was my son who had been so embattled, especially after all the family grief, I know that I would have done the same thing. Um, and to dispense with what I think are the like stupid arguments that have been percolating, the whole, well, this makes it easier for Trump to break the rules. Shut the fuck up. That's not a real argument. Like, maybe you can make that if this is your first moment observing politics, but for kind of
Or
all
being
the like,
born, yeah.
yeah, all the big wigs who are writing columns about how, well, now Democrats have lost all their footing too. It's just like, that's boring and dumb. Um, I think if I was a Democrat, an elected Democrat or part of his staff who had been like kind of lying about this, I think I'd be pretty peeved. But
Hmm.
that's kind of for them to fight out. What I don't like about it was I actually hated the statement. The statement was so This was a really hard decision. And, I had to do it because, Hunter is in trouble, but in this really oblique way that to me it's like,
About him relapsing, that
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but to me it's like if you're going to do this, make it about the fact that what this is really about, which is that he knows that Hunter is not safe under a Trump DOJ, that he knows that, as you say, they will cook up some kind of way to go after him if he gets off on this particular charge. And it's like, that's not about Hunter or his demons or the kind of crass way that Republicans have tried to use the weakest link in Biden's family to get at him. That is about the fact that we are headed into a time where someone who prides himself on being vindictive and who always talks about kind of retribution for his enemies is about to take power. Why isn't this part of that story? Like
Yeah.
the
No, that's a good
statement should
point. I
have
hadn't thought
been,
about that. Yep,
yeah,
yep.
I just think the statement should have been Hunter is not safe because he is on the enemies list. He's an enemy within. And guess what? So are XYZ. And now we have
Mhm,
these reports coming out that kind of belatedly
yeah,
Biden's inner circle is considering whether to do blanket pardons for, Schiff or Cheney or Fauci or any of these other people. And I just think doing that all together both would have kind of lessened, I think, the political damage of just
mhm,
doing this for your son, but also it gets at the other part of this that annoys me, which is we have been kind of begging Biden as the leader of Democrats to be less norm enamored for
yep,
years
yep,
now, and
yep, yep,
the time he's finally compelled to do it at a time where, mind you, his career's over, right? Like he has got personally nothing to lose here. And that he's only finally compelled to do it out of love for his son, which again, on a personal side, it's nice, but he's a politician. He's the leader of
mhm,
a party. So that's the part of it that kind of annoys me. Like he can only be roused to kind of overcome this creature of the Senate institutionalist mentality when his son is on the line. And so to me, I think this should have been one big batch. I think this should have been the protecting innocence from Trump's political retribution pardons. And I know that, for instance, someone like Schiff said, "Oh, I think you shouldn't do it for me. That looks defensive or whatever." But I think we also might have some amount of you say you don't want it to happen, and you're kind of hoping it does at the same
yeah,
time. But I think that's the way you should have done it. That helps Democrats craft a narrative about how Trump is out for himself. He's not out for you. He's obsessed with grudges. He's petty and small and vindictive. I think that would have handled the politics better. And also, I think Biden should absolutely do it because, I mean, are we under any delusion that like those people are going to be safe under Trump? There's been some reporting that some people who think they might come into Trump's crosshairs are like actively shopping around for the highest paid job offers they can get right now, specifically so they can fund a legal defense if they do come under fire. So,
interesting.
I just think I'm not mad that he did it. Some part of me was even like kind of good for you for just finally sticking your thumb in the eye of Trump and of the elites and of all the pearl clutchers, but
Yep.
I just think there was a smarter way to do it that would still have that same effect without doing this kind of like, oh my gosh, I just don't you feel bad for me and don't you feel bad for Hunter? It's like you're a politician, you're in the public eye, and what's more, you're supposed to really care about your party, which is in the wilderness right now. So maybe can we like sprinkle some strategy onto the pathos and do this in a little bit of like a smarter way?
Yeah, no, I buy all those points. Those make sense to me. I mean, I have, kind of individual thoughts about, kind of each car in the train of thought. I mean, first of all, I do think that, I mean, as we if Joe Biden had been reelected and then he did this, you'd kind of say, well, kind of do we start, is now we're going to have hearings and this. And so, as you say, to a certain extent, it's because like, oh, you're super mad. Well, guess what? Joe Biden's not going to be president anymore. So who the fuck cares is sort of, where I am on that. Or if Kamala Harris had won and we're going into that, I would have, some similar thing. Obviously the dynamics would be different because he could do it later, she could do it later, all those kind of things. I do think that to a certain extent, I mean, look, this is justified to me by the fact, and I consider it a fact, none of this would be happening. He's only in this position because he's the president's son. And to me, that is justification for it. The fact that, yes, all sorts of other things go unfair in the world, but in no other case do we not do one thing that is putting something right, because a lot of other things are not right, just as a basic thing. But I think my the intensity of my position is because, sort of what you said, that I really like that his willingness here to say, you know what, fuck you, like, you who work for that famous person who works for the New York Times, you, fuck you, and you who work on the Washington Post editorial board, also fuck you, and all you Republicans, fuck you guys as well. I love that. I love that. I love that he did that. And some of this is tied to my own personal feelings about the guy, but again, some of that is just how much I love that. And I actually do think, as I said, I want Democrats to have a bit more about that,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If you are, and I know that there are a few other people's, who kind of write commentary, who are really pissed at me about what I said. I just found out about this this morning, um, uh, in a funny kind of way, but we'll leave that aside. Um, that I'm being too cynical or whatever. But I do think that, a lot of why Democrats get in the situations that they are in, that they're the ones who pay attention to the criticism, right? And the people who criticize know they will pay attention, right? You don't criticize people who don't give a fuck, because what are you wasting your time for? And the other side doesn't give a fuck. And so I really think, they have a thing when, like, doctors take out appendixes, right? That if you're not taking out any healthy appendixes, you're doing it wrong, because you're not, you need to lean forward, not be missing anything. It's sort of like this: if you're not breaking some norms, you're not doing it right. So there's a broader kind of issue there on this issue of pardons for other people. One issue there is, it always comes up that, some of these people may not want pardons, because it does seem like, you're like, wait a second, I didn't do anything, why am I getting a pardon here? I don't want. Now, I think the best answer to this, like, who cares what they think? It's not up to them. It's not a, you don't have to, because sometimes people say they don't want it. It doesn't matter. It's a full power. President can do whatever the hell they want. um and in some cases, you kind of get to, it becomes a question of the extent of your imagination. Like, does Jamie Raskin need a pardon? Like, who, kind of like, where do you, because if you say, like, with uh Adam Schiff, what does he need a pardon for? Like, what can he possibly even, uh possibly with something like Tony Fauci? I guess they're saying, he said they didn't fund gain of function research, and by one definition, maybe there's a kind of a question of imagination. But I certainly agree with you. It would be a good thing to say, about all your vengeance, sorry, bud, I took away your vengeance because I just did this. I think that would be good as a form of messaging, to say, like, let's remember what you promised you would do. And to go back to my original theme, it would be a shot in the arm to say, like, that thing that has clearly been the primary motivation for you becoming president again, how about no? Because I'm taking it all away, because fuck you. That would be great. Not just on many levels, it would be great.
And I think part of the problem with what you're describing about the concern that people don't want pardons, or the concern that it'll maybe be read as they did do something wrong, is looped into the reason that I think most people who find out about the Hunter pardon are just going to think that it's kind of like familial self-dealing, kind of patronage to your family type thing. And that is
Mhm.
because they've done such a poor job of making the argument that this was partisan and cooked up and vindictive from the beginning, and that is the kind of enduring sin of the Biden
Yeah.
administration, which was putting Merrick Garland in charge of the first place and letting the Hunter stuff, continue to be in the hands of this Delaware AG who had all kinds of conflicts of interest and his own partisan stuff.
Yep.
And that's why I think, it's just Biden's inability to communicate in any way is then how we get to this place where he's trying to retroactively explain why this isn't just a corrupt kind of looking out for a family member type thing. And then there's no narrative that goes along with it. There's no storytelling and story building that would kind of help if he does do these other pardons. It seemed not like, oh, the crooked Democrats, and more a forward looking kind of like, you've got to be prepared for how vindictive Trump is going to be now. And I think that all would help them and would help them find their sea legs and start figuring out a way to define themselves kind of in this new Trump administration. But the most disappointing part of Biden is that he often, not always, and there's obviously a glaring exception to this, but he often does the right thing, but then is just completely unable to articulate it. And, we've talked a million times about how, as it is, Democrats are up against huge obstacles in communicating, and Republicans are so kind of favored on the marketing front. But this is just such a kind of microcosm of all of that, where what could, I think, and for some of our readers, as you say, has been taken as kind of a cool, like, finally we're doing a fuck you to the pearl clutchers type thing, is just so much less effective than it could have been.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, I 100% agree with those points, and I would say that on this issue of kind of like, okay, now you whether you are just like Trump, you will look to people who aren't paying close attention just like Trump. I think where I am at this point is that I think Democrats need to simply stop thinking in those terms. And what I mean by that is anybody who is, you know, taking the slightest bit of time to pay attention will know what this is. And if you're not, and if you think that, like, wow, maybe the Democrats do bad things too. Maybe maybe they're gangsterish too. Okay, yeah, maybe we are. Okay, go with that. Because I think in some ways the problem is that you end up with the worst of both worlds, which is that you one of Trump's, and in some ways this has always been the case for Republicans, um, because they do more bad things, that certain parts of people's brains, and probably more the people who don't pay as close attention, who by definition don't have kind of strongly rooted kind of ideological or partisan positions, they kind of think like, do I want the person who's kind of my team leader to be like fair and always doing the right thing, or kind of a bit of a gangster, you know? And a lot of people kind of want you to be a bit of a gangster. Like, who do I want protecting me? I want the person protecting me to kind of be maybe a bit of a bad guy. And and that is how people think. So I do think that um in some ways the sort of persnickety fastidiousness and all that kind of stuff, and this isn't something new to me, this is stuff I've been saying for 10 or 20 years, that no one cares about that. And I don't mean like not breaking the law, I just mean the kind of all the obsessive crossing of T's and dotting of I's. No one cares about that, A. And in many cases it makes you seem weak, and people don't like weak. People don't like kind of like, well, it's kind of it I should do it, but it's just kind of not proper, so I'm not gonna do it. People don't like that. So, in any case, I some of these things are things I've thought forever, but they did kind of, um, I don't know, this crystallized it for
Totally.
me.
I mean, that's got to be one of the biggest lessons of this election, right? Like Democrats ran on kind of preserving norms and it didn't work. So I mean on that front I'm totally with you. You know, my only other point about this is that the reason why presidents have been so nervous to exercise their pardon or clemency powers in the past is obvious, right? It's you pardon someone, they I don't know, get out of jail or whatever, and then they do something horrible. And then that gets hung around your neck forever. You know, you put a murderer on the streets, blah, 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 Willie Horton esque kind of thing. But on that same token, Biden should be acting as unshackled as he was with the Hunter pardon on all fronts. And I think that goes doubly for exercising his pardon and clemency power for people who are not related to him, but also not like elite politicians. Like he has
Right,
got
right.
to use a heavy hand with, you know, people who are incarcerated, especially because as we saw from the last Trump term, like a really kind of unremarked upon feature of it was bringing back executions in a big way. Like the number
Yeah, he likes killing
skyrocketed under
people. He
him,
likes killing people. Yep,
and we
yep.
know that now. And Biden, I think, should really feel like he's going to have blood on his hands if he doesn't get at least some of those people kind of out of danger. So, you know, I want to see a kind of fire hose of forgiveness at the end of this term, even though, you know, that's going to involve flawed people and bad faith Republican attacks. It's like, on the one hand, we're not going to have another presidential election for 4 endless years. So those attacks are going to run out of mileage at some point. And second, hang them on Biden, right? Next Democrat can
Exactly.
be like, I didn't do
He's
it. It
done.
was this
He's
old
done.
guy who's
Exactly.
biking around Rehoboth, right? That's got
Ex
nothing to do with me.
Exactly, that Biden is, because of how everything turned out, he's the past. He's, kind of like, sort of like with in the old days in Judea, you take the goat and kind of everybody pour their sins on the goat and we're gonna, push him off the edge of a cliff, right?
Right.
And so Biden's already off the edge of the cliff. And so load him up with whatever, who cares? I totally agree. A lot of people are talking about, as you said, commute, and with these guys on death row. No one's saying you're gonna let them out. They're just not gonna
Exactly.
be executed. So it's not like these people are probably all in like the lifetime solitary, whatever. So, but let me say something a little broader about the pardon power. And this is something, again, I think I first wrote about this 15 or 20 years ago on TPM. So this is not a reaction to anything about Biden on my part. I think I have always thought there should be a lot more pardons across the board. If you look, one of the things that Biden is getting criticized for now is that he didn't go through what is called the pardon attorney at the DOJ, right? So they set up a process where someone asks for a pardon, it goes to this person, they do all sorts of background checks and all these kind of things, and then the pardon attorney makes a recommendation to the president. Okay, the kind of, it's a process. I mean, sort of like all these things, they're processes and everything. But so I'm not sure that makes any sense. There's a place for it, but here's one thing about how that works. And if you look at the list of pardons, and most presidents, once they, once they're done pardoning their accomplices or like family members, they do some sort of like, hard luck cases, right? And if you see those in the past, you will see what I'm about to describe. The system for the pardon, the framework for petitioning the pardon attorney is that, first of all, you have to have served your sentence. You have to have, shown remorse, kind of taken responsibility, and you have to have not gone on to like a future life of crime once you're done with your first thing, right? Now, that makes all the pardons bullshit, basically, because like you're already out of jail. What are you pardoning? What you're doing is you're sort of notionally unconvicting them, which sort of like if you did 10 years in prison, like who gives a fuck? Because you're not exonerating them, right? I mean, some people they spent 30 years in prison and suddenly they're exonerated. It's the most important thing in the world to them for obvious reasons. But this is just, it means nothing. The the pardon power, look, the pardon power is a weird thing. It's totally arbitrary. It's up to this one person. It is absolutely, so the whole concept comes from the British monarchy and the theory of monarchy, where in the British system, still theoretically today, you commit a crime, it's against the king's peace, right? I run this place. You did something, it's an offense against me, right? Because I keep the peace. And because I'm the king, I'm just gonna forgive you out of the whatever of my heart. It's a weird thing, but it does create a certain looseness in the system that is inherently brutal and unforgiving. And what I would like to see is the president spring a bunch of people from jail. Just have it be a thing, like maybe at the end of everybody's term, you come up with 1,000 people in the federal prison system. Now, obviously, you want to do a little homework of not let someone who's like a hardened gangster and is going to go out and kill people. But there are people in there who either aren't violent or, you know, this is someone deserving of some mercy and is highly unlikely to do anything else. And maybe like they're 5 years into their 25-year term and just like, manna from heaven. You're like, dude, you're done. You're out. Like that's just, I love that. And does it happen for everybody? No, but like life sucks, right? And so this idea, like we've already sort of processized the pardon power into nothing. It should be letting people go, taking the burden off people again in a precisely because of the irrationality of it. Because maybe everyone could have the hope. Maybe it'll happen to me next time, right? So I don't know. That's my feel. We should just do a lot more of it. And even, they talked a lot about Biden did do a thing a while back where he pardoned a bunch of people with like pot offenses,
Mhm.
basically. But again, because of persnicketyness and process, like the people had to apply for it. And
Mm.
like someone mentioned in some article that just came out, like in theory, he pardoned 10,000 people, but only like 100 people have applied. And probably because, like, if you did time for pot, you're probably not like working at a white shoe law firm, right? You're not going to like, oh man, I got to put in my papers for my pardon for the time I already served. Like what? Like I would prefer it. Like, what if he just said like everybody who's in for a marijuana offense under these categories, you're done. Just walk out of jail, dude. Or like
Totally.
if you've already done your time, no paperwork. We're going to do the paperwork for you. It didn't happen. You don't have to say you were ever convicted of a felony. So again, this is obviously nothing to do with Hunter Biden, but just as a general point, criminal justice is brutal and unforgiving, even when it's done well. So we should use the pardon power a lot more than we do. And weirdly, in the old days for governors, because it used to be pretty much all, there wasn't as much federal uh, not as many things were dealt with at the federal level. It was pretty common for governors to issue all sorts of pardons. A lot of times, like the jails were just too full. They had to let a bunch of people free. Like, Leadbelly, the famous like folk singer, like a couple, I mean, great genius folk singer, had some problems with impulsiveness and violence. I think he killed like 2 or 3 people in his life or something like this in like bar fights. I think twice he was let out just because he was pardoned for some random reason.
Especially, I think, on the heels of, during COVID, that was happening a lot. Like, they were letting a lot of people out of jail
Yeah.
because overcrowding was dangerous
Yeah.
and everything. I mean, it's just that kind of thing just always kind of shows through the facade that we know that in a country that is as heavily incarcerated as the United States, that you're going to have probably the majority of people in there for dumb stuff. Like, I know someone who is a prison guard, or whatever the proper terminology is for that, and she was saying 90% of the people in the prison that she works are there for doing things that anyone else in her life could have done. And that it's just kind of 10% who are the outliers who have done something more than the ordinary evil kind of thing. And so I totally agree with you. And it also just loops into my greater point, which is this should be a time where Biden is just saying, fuck it, we ball. I'm going to do all kinds of things. And, if they're to help people, all the better. If they are to try to protect people from what's coming, all the better. If they are to help Democrats piece
Awesome.
together some credibility, all the better. If things don't work, guess what? A lot of stuff didn't work that he did carefully and methodically and was right about, right? And it didn't make any kind of difference. And now we're headed into a Trump term where Trump is going to inherit the economy that he rebuilt. He's probably going to get a lot of credit for the infrastructure stuff that's coming online. And so, I mean, have we ever been at a place where we need a more kind of YOLO lame duck than now? And that has simply got to extend beyond the person that Biden personally loves,
Yeah,
like
I agree with
once
that.
again, he is a
Totally.
professional politician. And I know that everyone in the whole world is mad at him right now, but he should just use that to like fuel his fire and to
Mhm.
just go out in a freaking blaze of glory, because any kind of legacy he has at this point, it's going to be retroactive. It's going to be after people experience Trump and are like, hey, wow, he actually did a lot of good things. So might as well just go out with a bang, right? And hope that he can kind of pick up his flowers at a later date.
Yeah, no, and final point from me on this, that I say all that I said before. I'm not someone who thinks, "Oh, no one should be in prison," or like, the whole criminal justice system is bad. I think we have seen during the pandemic and whatever, the world is a fallen place. And people do bad things, and you need systems to. So I believe in lots of reforms of the criminal justice system, but I'm not someone who believes like, oh, prison should be abolished and police should be abolished. Basically, I believe in how things work with changes I'd like to make. So it's not even that. It's just like it's a balance. It's a balance. You need this kind of because one I'll just leave it at that. It's a balance. It puts a dash of mercy into the system that is just kind of in its nature pretty merciless. And we've leaned too far in that direction.
So, kind of speaking of going out with a bang, now we're going to talk about Pete Hegseth, who is trying to kind of keep his nomination alive, even though, I even maybe by the time our listeners are hearing this, it might be kind of curtains for him. The most recent kerfuffle is that we had the allegations kind of drip, drip, drip. We were getting all these anecdotes about him having drinking problems, and there's the rape allegation and all the kind of subsidiary shitty towards women stuff that all kind of builds towards him
Sub
having
rape.
like two
Yeah.
acrimonious divorces and affairs and whatever. And that kind of culminated with this New York Times story, where they got a hold of an email that his mother had sent to him in 2018, where, she said she was disgusted by his treatment of women and that he needs to get help and all this kind of stuff. And then his mom goes on Fox News and does this kind of clearly coached anti-media screed where she says she's there to kind of expose the insidious workings of the New York Times. She says something really hilarious about how reporters are just doing this for the quote commission, as if we're like making some amount of money per story, which like that would be cool. Like I know I went into this field for the money for sure. But and then also and it was almost kind of like it would have been sweet if it was in a different context, her total just misunderstanding of how reporting works, because she said that she was given this like ultimatum, that she must give a statement or they're going to run the story, and it's like, no babe, they were going to run the story either way. They're just telling you we are going to publish now, so if you want to get your side into the story, we
Yeah,
we need that statement right
we're
now,
happy for you
right?
not to say anything,
Like
basically.
it was rigorous kind of responsible journalism, the way you would want people to act. But so that's going on, and then he went on the Megyn Kelly show, to talk about how he's a flawed person, but this is a Kavanaugh-esque treatment. He's being railroaded. This isn't really true. And then he's been doing the visits on Capitol Hill to talk to everyone, and his mom has been calling people on Capitol Hill. So I guess he and Elon Musk kind of have that in common. But we're recording this a day late, Thursday afternoon, and the signs just haven't been great for him. You've got an awful lot of Republican senators who seem to be kind of moving the wrong direction. Like what started out with everyone gets their day in court, let's hear what he has to say, are turning more into, yeah, we had a long conversation, and nothing more than that. We've got reports now that Trump is kind of readying the backup players, that he's considering Ron DeSantis, which would be kind of a hilarious turn of events. So things are not looking great for Pete, in this late date.
Yeah, that's an understatement, and I think that, well, first of all, I think that, um, as is often the case of, in these sorts of situations, I don't know what you call these sorts of situations, these sort of flame outs, that in the heat of the moment, I lose track of like, okay, which things are fake and which things are cool, and that's just you being a dude. Can we have like a flow chart here so I can at least understand what the story is? Because I it it I th- I thought you said two wives. I thought
Well,
he
he's
has
on the
admitted,
third.
right, but I thought
Mhm.
he has said that he has admitted that he's cheated on all three of his wives, and I guess had five affairs with one wife that was 4 years, and all these kind of things. And he was saying yesterday he'll give up drinking
Oh my god.
if he starts running the Pentagon, and stuff like this. You're like, it's sort of like, if this is a condition of you get going into AA, we shouldn't be talking about the Pentagon job. I think you need to back up. I think you're getting ahead of yourself a little bit. I mean, it's so comical, and even, I mean, the stuff isn't comical, sort of. I mean, some of it's comical, but it's comical we're having this conversation. And yesterday, some of the Republican senators were even sort of like, yeah, I think, I think he said to one of them, like, I'll give up drinking if I'm confirmed. And the senator's like, good call, dude. I think that would be, I think you'd be well advised. Maybe do it either way.
I love the
Um,
connotation there of like, but if it doesn't work, I am back at the bar, baby.
yeah, I mean, and I believe in mothers and everything, but kind of, when you're running the Pentagon, we don't want to be getting calls from your mom. We want you stand on your own feet. The kind of I don't know what to say. I felt a when they published that email. I don't think I felt bad for him. I felt bad for his mom, because kind of like, she's talking about pretty bad stuff, but like, stuff between a parent and a child, it's, maybe leave that to them. I'm not saying they shouldn't have run it. I'm not saying that was my journalistic thing. It just, I felt a little, uh,
It's
you know,
icky, right? It's
yeah,
it's
it's a
that thing
little,
of like we know each other too well now kind of
yeah,
thing.
kind of like, okay, you obviously suck, but like we'll let you talk privately with your mom, and uh this thing's pretty clearly going down the tubes. I mean, the part that really is funny is that Trump is people get so damaged getting close to Trump that Trump doesn't he's not going to do the dignity of like at least keeping his runner-ups private while you're still trying, that he's leaking is like, yeah, I talked to Ron. Probably do. We'll let this Pete dude flail for a few more days before I nominate Ron. But I guess I mean they all deserve it, right? But it's
Well,
still.
I mean, that's part of it too, which like a little I mean, I'm not really sympathetic towards this guy. I mean, part of it is like,
Oh, I'm
you
not
know,
sympathetic either. It's but it's
totally.
it's
I'm
funny
just
watching
saying
how Trump treats people.
right. I'm just saying, like, it's not your first rodeo, and like knowing that you're someone who has this degree of skeletons in the closet. Maybe when you get the call, you're like, "Hey, thanks, boss, but this one isn't for me." I mean, same with Gates, right? Like, there is something that is not. It's not like the primary thing going on here, but the hubris of these dudes who have not. I mean, I know no one cares about like experience anymore, but who has nothing even resembling anything close to the experience to be in charge of this sprawling, gigantic, complicated, important department, but not even to really have the level of introspection necessary to be like, well, have something of a drinking problem and have a pretty well documented history of being terrible to every woman who comes within 10 feet of me. Like, maybe a confirmation hearing just isn't for me this time, right? So
I mean, in the old days, if you'd say like it turned out he had an affair several years ago, and you'd say, "Oh, phew, not going through a confirmation hearing, having to talk about the affair." Where it's like here, it's like an affair,
which one?
husband of the year if it's just one.
Right.
I mean, it I do think in a I mean, who knows what I mean, Trump knew these people were like just obviously unqualified. Where you see the comparison with Pam, it's Pam, right? Pam
Mhm.
Bondi. With Pam Bondi, like she's basically a joke, but she was the attorney general of a big state. Kind of by definition, you can't say she's unqualified because she was, I don't know if she was one term or two terms, but like that of by definition she's qualified in that case. I'm not saying she's like well qualified, but you can't say she's unqualified. In Gates' case, I mean, you'd think that like being seriously investigated for having sex with minors would be like, like I know, it's not like being convicted, but there's certain things like horseshoes and hand grenades. Just being close is enough, right? I mean, if you had to really look closely to see if you were having sex with minors, like maybe not attorney general, maybe reality show. I don't know, something, some other kind of line of work. But I think more generally, and so who knows whether Trump knew has Hegseth has like had like 50 affairs or whatever. I mean, at a certain point, there's not affairs. It's like a common law open marriage, right? I mean, I don't even I don't know what to call that. Um, it clearly Trump thought that, dude, I'm back, and like I'm gonna appoint my horse to be Secretary of Commerce because that's how back I am. You're gonna do anything, and clearly he's seeing that he's not that back. And the Republican senators are kind of doing it in a weird way where they don't want no like it. I don't think in Gates' case anybody ever said they wouldn't vote for him. And I'm not sure anybody has said that now with Hegseth. But like clearly there's a kind of, there's a way they have to go about it, but they're clearly saying, dude, no. We're not doing this.
It's also like, I know that what everyone loves about Trump is that he's like not a real politician, but there is a reason that people vet people, and it's to protect yourself from this degree of embarrassment. I mean, and as you say, he doesn't care, right? The Gates stuff, that was all public record. Like, a lot of this Hegseth stuff was well known. It's not, I've seen some kind of ass covering in like the New York Times write up where it's like the Trump camp is furious that Hegseth didn't mention the police report. And it's like, that's your job, babe. That's your job. Like, maybe he should have said something, but that's not his job. You're coming to him with this, right? And also, one, we've also already had two failed nominations. The second has gotten very little
That DEA
publicity, but
guy, yeah,
the
who just bagged.
DEA sheriff who was nominated for that role, who I guess this is a little bit of a black mark on Bondi because I think they're close.
Okay.
Um, but his thing was like, his son had gone to jail for stabbing, for a stab fight of some such, and that came up. And then also, a little weirdly, like, people on the right didn't like him because he was
He
kind of a hard
arrested some
ass
preacher
about,
about COVID or
yeah,
something?
during
Yeah, yeah.
COVID.
So he did
Um,
something, like, relatively like, he
yeah, kind
followed
of
the
normal.
law
And then he
once.
was like,
Yeah,
whew, this is too much, and kind of took himself out of contention. But
right.
again, it's like, in the Trump terms, it's almost we've learned our lesson about trying to kind of define it in contrast to a normal politician, and to how a normal presidency would unfurl. And like, even though it makes us want to die thinking about the fact that if Biden had put up three nominees who fell one after the other, it would have been five alarm fire, like, this presidency is over before it started, historically bad president, this will go down in the history books, and Trump just never has to operate under those rules. I mean, it does, though. I don't want to fall into the trap of like Teflon Don, nothing he does matters. Like, this matters, right? Like, some of coming in with these shockingly unqualified people and shockingly compromised people was that he's like, it's my second term, bitch. Like, you are all my foot soldiers. Put my people through because I said so, And like, it didn't work. And he's going to get some lunatics through for sure. And I'm sure to some degree, Senate Republicans are like, oh my gosh, like, how much pushback can we give, as they're doing these like milquetoast statements about like, well, we gotta see, he's gotta explain himself, right? It's like profiles and courage. But still, having three people that he wanted, and two of those for really high profile,
The
big,
biggest
important
positions. Yep,
roles
yep.
fall before they even get a hearing, that does not speak to a president who is shrouded in a mandate and kind of infused with unflappable strength.
Yeah, and I think that whether or not you have the presidency is over headlines, which obviously are always ridiculous, that I think this does matter. Well, it doesn't, I don't need some one of the prestige New York Times reporters to tell me it matters, because the way it matters is that everybody realizes now that these senators are willing to say, no, 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 we're not going to do that thing, and they've already done it. And frankly, I kind of thought, I mean, I didn't know all this stuff was gonna. I mean, I didn't know he would have a pretty serious rape allegation against him. I didn't know he'd have apparently alcoholism and all these kind of sordid personal life. But I actually thought Hegseth was, out of all these people, the most likely to get through, because I thought, you can, the way the Pentagon runs, you could have a deputy secretary there who kind of runs things, and just some kind of bro idiot who's the nominal secretary, and whatever it is, what it is. I mean, it's not great because the Secretary of Defense is actually in the chain of command. Like, if you want to like start a war, the president has to tell it to the Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense tells it to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So it's not great. But I kind of thought, like, again, he's some random bro from Fox. Like, who cares? Whereas with Gates, you're saying, I don't know, a dude investigated for like sex trafficking. Maybe that's not going to work. And then you have uh, Tulsi Gabbard, where I think, there's a lot of things that Republicans don't give a crap about, but national security and spy stuff, there's a lot of them that actually care about that, that matters to them. And she's suspect to a lot of people. So I don't know if that's gonna like, I don't know if there's anything. I have no reason to believe that Tulsi Gabbard has this kind of stuff, that she's gonna have had affairs or be like an addict or whatever. But there's real serious question marks about who she is and who she works for and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of think there might be with Kash Patel too. So so those people, I'm just not sure they're going to get confirmed. So I don't think that Hegseth is going to be the last one. And I think it matters for the reasons that that we said. We don't need sort of fancy people to tell us that it's bad for Trump. It is bad for Trump.
And the way it's operating right now is there's kind of like one spotlight at a time, right? The Hegseth fever pitch only kind of rose after Gates had already dropped out.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
if Hegseth is out, it's like, is it going to be Tulsi? Is it going to be Kash Patel? There's just, this is kind of the downside of rolling out all your people super early, is there's a lot of time for scrutiny before you kind of get to the pressure of, well, they've gone through a hearing and Republicans, are you going to kind of screw me over on this or not? So, it's a live ball situation, which, by the way, only I think adds more credence to our earlier points about how Biden should just be going nuts right now. Because guess what? All the attention is elsewhere. So do whatever you want. I hope he's a little emboldened to do it.
I hadn't, the point you just made, I had not thought about before, and you're really exactly right. And I would about each one having attention now, and I think part of that is that in a normal, you know, sort of turnover of power, you have a new person, right? And so the new person just became president elect, and there is just a huge appetite. Who is this person? Who are their friends? What are they going to do? But we know who he is, and we know who his friends are, and we know everything about him. So there's none of that. None of that thing is there, right? There's none of that appetite. He's not president yet, so he's not doing things yet. So everything is about the nominees, right? So there's kind of there's no other, there's nothing else to take up the room, to take up the oxygen. That Yeah. So I think that's exactly right, and uh, I think Gabbard especially. I I really think like people like the McConnells and stuff. I just don't know if they're up for that. That's my sense.
So I want to be quick on this because we're already kind of running a bit long, but it ties into what you just said about how all the oxygen is on the nominees. And part of that is because Democrats have been so unequivocally lame, like doing nothing. Like, the Senate Democrats who are in charge of committees have all but given up, hung up the gavels early. They're not doing anything. I think people have really great ideas about what they could do in these dwindling months, including, publish everything you've got that's bad about Trump and those in his orbit, get the Jack Smith report out there. You still have subpoena power for a while. Start doing the narrative building you're going to have to do to lead up to 26 and bring in people you can talk to. There is just seemingly absolutely no interest on any of this. I broke a story last week about this budding effort to put in protections for federal lawsuits against journalists kind of before Trump gets in. And that was really an exception to the rule, right? Like something where Democrats were trying to do some kind of behind the scenes last minute stuff. And of course, it's a long shot because the filibuster and all the rest. But what's interesting about the connection there is that Jamie Raskin is the leader of that movement. He's been kind of on the forefront of press protections for a while, but it was his legislation in the first place. He kind of re-upped it. He got one Republican on board, and now the news just came out. He announced his candidacy to be the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, which big spot, right? He was already ranking member on oversight, which is probably kind of the second most important one, but he's gunning for the judiciary. He threw his hat into the ring, even though Jerry Nadler at that point was like not showing any signs of not wanting the gig again.
Hmm.
But the story just broke yesterday that or Nadler put out a statement saying, he's going to step down. He's proud of the work he did, basically kind of clearing the way for Raskin to take over. And amid all of the Democratic, you know, torpor, this is kind of the first thing that's happened that I feel really good about, because Raskin is smart and aggressive and not clouded by the whole institution brain thing.
Hmm.
He's a really effective member. There's a reason why his profile has risen so much. And so, not that Nadler was particularly bad, but he's definitely part of this kind of old guard of Democratic leadership. So the fact that Raskin was kind of aggressive and that he's going to be taking over what for the next 2 years anyway is going to be pure messaging, I think is good for Democrats and a good sign that at least some of the kind of budding stars in the party are not content to just like sit back and wait until leadership is handed to them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Jerry Nadler is, I guess, technically not anymore for me, but was my representative for a really long time. I interviewed him once. He was never a terribly dynamic figure, but he's done good thing, in the past. He a lot of good work and all that stuff. But I think he's almost 80. And this is a story that has played out for Democrats a lot recently, not just with Joe Biden. One of the strange things is that you have Nancy Pelosi, who I think is 84, who is who is I mean, it's great that she stepped aside for Hakeem Jeffries, but she is like the sort of the odd woman out of something. You're like, wow, she's still operating on with every piston moving and everything.
Mm-hmm.
um and it's not that people have to retire from office necessarily, but yes, 100% Jamie Raskin is comparatively young, very dynamic, very uh all the things you want. And I do actually think I've seen it in some of the sort of the inside DC press sheets, and they're kind of presenting it as, Democrats in disarray. But he's not the only one who's doing this. I think there are two or three others that on committees that are less, ag or something like that, that there is this kind of move that, you know, given everything that's happened, people who are closer to my age, basically telling people who are, in their 70s, like, dude, I'm I'm ready.
And
And so it's happening,
perhaps
and that's great. And that's great.
and perhaps most saliently of that reshuffling is now AOC wants Raskin's old job as the
Oh,
ranking
interesting.
member on oversight, which,
Interesting. That's
come
great.
on, no
That's great.
brainer.
Yep.
You gotta
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
she's proven herself to be especially talented as a communicator and is probably the most popular person in the Democratic Party at this moment. So, no reason not to do that. I love the push from the people who are below the tier of leadership, because to some degree
Hmm.
it's like, if you guys aren't going to do it, then get out of the way or get run over, because
Yeah.
I think all the torpor I mentioned is coming down from these kind of old guard Democrat types. And, to his credit so far, and we haven't seen Hakeem Jeffries have like a ton to do yet since he kind of inherited the mantle from Pelosi, but by all reports, he's just kind of letting it happen. He's not really like getting involved. He's not doing
Yeah.
blocking and tackling for the incumbents, and that's a good thing to see as well.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of these things where there is a part of being a legislative leader, which is in the same way that you run the caucus, which is the incumbents, right? So like someone's going to primary an incumbent, by definition, you're like, no, because I work for the incumbents. So there's a dimension of that that is natural for a party leader, and as you said, that he's basically a party leader might say, hey, seniority, back off. This is the
Hmm.
system, and he's not. So he's basically, it's more than allowing it to happen, and it's a good thing. And the thing with AOC is that, she's different in my book in a good way from Jamie Raskin. These are people who
Hmm.
speak in very different, I don't want to say languages. I think they're entirely complementary, but right? They're just different. They speak politically a different language, and it's good because you want both of those languages being spoken. She is big on social media. She is very brash, young, not just chronologically, but politically. That's great. Raskin is, I think, a former law professor, so he's comes within that. So it's having him in that position. It's great having her in that position because those are speaking different languages, speaking to different groups that the Democrats both need to be speaking to. So that's great.
And I think most importantly, the thing that they have in common, which, they became friends when they were on oversight together, but something I like is that they're both unafraid to be creative and to kind of think of novel approaches to these, especially the kind of technocratic
Yep.
uh, backlog stuff that's kept Democrats from being effective, and that the comms are obviously most important in the wake of the election, but that acceptance of kind of resourceful, creative ideas to get around these log jams and to lessen Republicans, powerful wielding of kind of institutional blocks to make Democrats so ineffective, I think is going to be the most important part of a Democratic Congress, like regaining legitimacy in people's eyes. So that's another really good attribute that they both share.
Yeah, and as we know, I think that even not in a terribly optimistic scenario, there's a really good chance that the Democrats are going to control the House in 2 years, just almost osmotically, just kind of thermostatically, and I think it'll be more than thermostatic, and yeah, and that's the thing about Jamie Raskin, that he his credentials, his upbringing are highly technocratic. A law professor, right? It's
At
almost like
Yale.
yeah, it's almost like lawyers are the definitional technocrats
Hmm.
in some ways, and yet he is not bound by that at the messaging level. Just about, again, what you're talking about, the thinking outside the box thing. So yeah, I think that's great, and there's just and something that we've talked about a lot in the podcast over the last few years, that you're looking, why can't we do that? Why can't we do that? Like, don't tell me that little weird rule that, oh, don't, the kind of thing when people always talk about, why can't, why can't you just uh confirm 100 judges before in December? Like, do you actually have to do this 3 days and that 3 days? Like, yeah, kind of how it's done, but can't you just call into the committee of the whole and just say, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to throw all the rules aside and pass all these people at once. Like, why can't you do that? Because a lot of those things are kind of, and you have to do that. And I do think that is one of the things we can sort of see as one of Trump's superpowers, of just like, kind of like, what? Why can't we? Yeah. Why don't we just say we'll just say, forget all about that stuff and just do what we want. And if it's not
And
totally illegal, just that's fine.
totally. And also, it's just Democrats need something to be
Yeah.
excited about right
Yep.
now. Give them the ones that they like and give
Yep.
them a microphone and let them, you know, grow and learn as messengers in the party while we're preparing for kind of a new generation of leadership.
Totally. Totally. So, I think that covers all of our ground. I want to just remind everybody, we still don't have, kind of things, dates set and everything, but we are planning to do an in-person podcast, probably in DC early in 2025. So keep that on your radars, and I think probably pretty soon we'll be able to, kind of firm it up with some dates and stuff like that. But keep that in mind. And if you have, we want to do more of these going forward. Take us a little while to kind of get our sea legs and everything. But if you'd like us to do one in your town or something like that, if there's interest, drop us a line. So we want to get into this. We want to figure out the best way to do it and all that kind of stuff. So have that in mind. Sorry for the congested voice. Thanks for bearing with me on this podcast. I think we've covered the ground that we need to cover. Anything else before we sign off, Kate?
No, I'll see you next week.
All right. Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.